Hello, dear viewers. You are on the Legends of the Old West channel. Today I will tell you a touching story from the Wild West about a man who dared to help a girl despite the danger and everything around him. If you like it, please support the channel with a like, subscribe and comment. It's very important to us and helps us create new stories for you. 1881. Northern Arizona is a land where the earth spares no one, and the hearts of people sometimes become even more severe than the merciless rocks and scorching sun. Here lived Eli Hawk, a man who once served as a frontiersman, protecting the borders and peace in these harsh places. But now his home is a lonely place, secluded among the rocky cliffs and endless sands. A year ago, his life was turned forever. In an Apache raid, he lost everything, his wife and children. The house that had been the sound of laughter and life was now a burning ash. Eli's heart was torn apart, and his soul was racked with the cold of loss. The evening air was filled with the quiet crackling of the fire he had built at the foot of the hill. The flames seemed to reflect his inner fire, the pain and bitterness that still lingered to this day. Eli sat staring into the flames and spoke quietly, the words tumbling from his lips like a confession to himself.
They took everything, leaving only ashes and pain. How can I go on living if there is no hope left?
The night grew thicker, and the cold wind increased, cutting through the silence of the desert, making the flames dance and crackle. He sighed, clenching his fists tightly, as if trying to hold on to the last sparks of life within him.
So be it,
he said quietly.
I am ready to face my last dawn.
And in that decision, among the stars and winds, fate was already whispering about the coming changes that would not leave him alone. The sun was slowly sinking behind the red rocks of northern Arizona, and the air was growing cool, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Eli Hawk, a former frontiersman, had lived alone among these barren hills for years. His footsteps were sure and quiet, accustomed to solitude, but today something made him slow down. In the distance, on the sunburned sand, he spotted a silhouette, faint and shaky. Moving closer, Eli saw the girl. She sat, almost motionless, her body haggard, her skin covered with dust and the marks of wounds. She wore furs reminiscent of the Navajo tribe, but on her chest were patterns like Cherokee symbols, a sign Eli had never seen so close before. The girl's eyes burned with desperate determination and some inexplicable bitterness. She clutched the knife in her hand as if it were her only hope and defense. She didn't speak. Her silence was like a wall, hiding fear and distrust. But Eli knew she had no choice, and she was too tired to fight alone.
You're a long way from home,
he said softly, trying not to frighten her more.
Let me help you.
She shook her head slightly, her eyes still fixed on him, as if testing every gesture. But when he held out his hand gently, she struggled to get up without removing the knife. Eli felt an old fear clench in his chest, the fear of facing again the shadows of the past he'd tried to escape. But there was something alive in that gaze, something that urged him to help despite the risk.
I can't leave you here,
he whispered.
Come with me.
Step by step, supporting her, he led the girl to his lonely home at the foot of the hills. Every step they took echoed in the silence of the desert, as if fate had already begun to weave a new, complicated story. After Eli had gently brought Tessa into his house, the silence hung heavy and tense, like an impenetrable shroud over their lives. The old house, made with his own hands, smelled of smoke and dust, seemed foreign and cold now. Tessa didn't say a word. Her eyes, bright but tired, didn't give an ounce of credibility. She held the knife tightly, as if it were the last promise of safety in this world where she was but a fugitive. Eli watched her bitterly. He knew there was a deep wound hidden in her heart, but realized that no words could awaken trust unless she herself allowed it.
You can sleep here,
he said quietly.
But don't think I'll close my eyes if someone comes for you.
Tessa, without averting her gaze, merely nodded, as if accepting the inevitability of a fate that did not ask her opinion. Outside, in the neighboring houses, whispers began. Mrs. Grady, a widow from a neighboring ranch, looked out the window and spoke sternly when Eli met her gaze.
Enemy blood on your doorstep is a dangerous game, Eli. Are you prepared for what may come?
Eli remained silent. He felt the weight of responsibility fall back on his shoulders, as if those years of loneliness had changed nothing. Night was approaching, and the house was filled with the sounds of the desert, the wind, the creaking of wood, the distant howl of coyotes. But inside, there was silence and anticipation of a storm that had not been anticipated. The night passed without sleep. Eli's house, once quiet and habitually empty, now resembled a sensitive beast crouched on the ground. The cracking of boards underfoot sounded louder than before. The flames in the hearth danced nervously. Tessa was awake. She was barely moving, squatting against the wall, knife in hand, as if ready to snap at any moment. The light slid across her face, emphasizing her fatigue and inner tension. Eli looked at her furtively. He no longer felt like the master of this house. He had become his fortress, and she was the unknown, the savage, the cornered. And yet, he couldn't kick her out. He couldn't, and that was beginning to frighten him. In the morning, when the sun had just touched the hills, he went out. The wind was sharp from the south. Something about it was unsettling, predatory. He walked down to the edge of the trail, to where the well had once stood, long since dried up, and froze. On the dusty ground lay the skull of a bull. An arrow with a scarlet ribbon on its shaft had been driven through its forehead. Eli bent down, ran his finger over the bone, dry, smooth, recent. He knew who had done it, and he knew what it meant. 3 days before the blood, an old mark, a quiet but definitive statement. He took the skull in his hands and walked backward, feeling his legs grow heavy. Back at the house, Tessa knew right away. She didn't ask. She looked at the skull in his hands and stood up slowly, as if out of habit. Her eyes expressed no fear, only emptiness and determination.
They're close,
Eli said hoarsely.
They don't need conversation, only payback.
You shouldn't have gotten involved.
She replied quietly.
They won't stop until they get what they want.
Then let them come. But I won't give a man to the wolves, even if I don't know why I saved him.
They stood in silence, soaked in the smell of smoke and early morning. The world outside the windows was still the same. Silent desert, red earth, scorched rocks. But in that silence, something was moving now. Something menacing and inescapable, like an impending storm. And in this house that had known only loneliness for so long, a sullen but strong bond was forming. Not trust, not love, but the will to stand together. The wind brought the smell of smoke, faint, almost imperceptible, but Eli caught it. He was standing by the well, wiping his hands on his pants, when he saw Mrs. Grady coming up the hill, a slouching, gaunt woman with eyes like steel.
I saw her.
She said without further introduction.
She's not from here. She's not one of ours. We have our own troubles, Eli. We don't need strangers.
He was silent, staring at the horizon as if it held the answer. His neighbor's words were sinking into him like a dusty residue.
If you don't take her out, they'll come and burn your house down, and with it, all of us.
In the evening, the neighbors gathered, 3 men and Grady's widow. The fire smelled of goat fat and anxiety. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten, just stared into their eyes, direct, tired, insistent.
You know how it is,
said Old Buck.
First you save one, then you bury them all.
Tessa listened from the shadows. There was no fear in her gaze, just the alienation Eli knew. She'd heard it before and knew how it usually ended. When the people had dispersed, he went into the house. Tessa was sitting against the wall, knife still in her hand.
They're afraid of you,
he said.
Not because of what you did. It's because you remind them how fragile order is.
Tessa didn't answer right away. She looked up slowly, and for the first time she spoke.
You don't know who you saved.
Eli stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to read a book in an unfamiliar language. Then he went to the door, picked up the old rusty carbine, and set it on the threshold.
I'm not hiding you,
he said.
I'm standing right next to you.
That night, they did not sleep. She sat by the window, he by the door. Outside the house, the desert breathed hot and wary. Somewhere far away in the gloom, shadows were already moving. Eli closed the door behind him, cutting off the sounds of the foreign world where neighbors wandered and whispered, looking suspiciously in his direction. Inside the house was quiet. Only the crackling of the fire in the fireplace filled the space with warmth and shadows. Tessa sat on the wooden floor in the corner, knees drawn up to her chest, knife clutched tightly in her hands. Not just a tool, but her only shield, her story, her pain. Eli came slowly over and sat down beside her, his gaze focused and attentive, as if he were trying to read her silence behind the closed door.
You said I don't know who I saved.
He began quietly, not wanting to upset the delicate balance.
Tell me, let me understand.
Tessa looked up. A mixture of bitterness, pride, and stubbornness burned in them. Her voice was barely audible, but every word cut through the air like a blade.
My father was an outcast. His tribe, the Navajo, considered him a traitor, a disgrace. He betrayed his own, they say. My mother is a white woman, a stranger to these lands. I am a child of two worlds, and an outcast in both.
She pressed the knife to her chest, as if trying to feel stronger.
They want me back to punish me, to erase me like a stain on their honest face. I am cursed, on both sides, between two worlds, cut by a blade.
Eli listened, feeling the weight of her words pressing on his heart. He realized that his job now was not just to keep the peace of the house, but to protect a fate that was vulnerable but unbroken.
You're not just a refugee,
he said, clenching his fist tightly.
You're a survivor, and I won't let them take you.
Tessa looked at him for the first time, not with apprehension, but with a determination that masked a growing hope. Her eyes reflected not only pain, but strength, a strength willing to fight on, even when the whole world was against her. Night fell with a heavy shroud, thickening the darkness around the lonely house on the hill. A cold wind howled outside the windows, piercing through both stone and flesh. Every rustle outside seemed like thunder in the silence, every movement of shadow a harbinger of danger. Eli, breathing heavily, silently nailed boards to the windows. His hands trembled, but only from fatigue, not from fear. He knew that fear now could cost a life. His mind was reeling with old memories. The loss, the war, the emptiness he had been sinking into for the last few years. But now a fire flared inside, distant and weak, but real, a desire to protect. Tessa stood in the corner of the room, slumped against the wall. Her eyes darted around, studying every shadow, every detail around her. Her heart was pounding frantically, not just from fatigue and pain, but from a new feeling. For the first time in a long time, there was someone around who wouldn't betray her. She thought of her father, an outcast whose name drew only contempt from the Navajo. Of her mother, a white woman who had left her a legacy of the curse of both sides. As Eli pulled an old Colt from under the bench, his gaze met Tessa's. He silently held the weapon out to her, a symbol of trust and acceptance.
You're not my guest tonight.
His voice was firm but soft.
You're my partner. We will survive together or die together.
Tessa took the Colt, feeling the weight of not only the metal, but also the responsibility. A wave of struggle rose in her soul. She could no longer hide, run. She had to become strong, despite betrayal and fear. At this moment, as the wind outside the windows turned into howls and the house became their fortress, they were silent. Silent, knowing that tomorrow might not come, but if it did, they would face it shoulder to shoulder. Eli mentally repeated, "This is not just a rescue. It is the beginning of a new path, a path where there is no retreat." Tessa whispered to herself, "I'm not alone anymore, and I won't let them take me away." The night slowly thickened, and the storm was coming. But inside the house, in those boards and silence, there was a light of struggle and hope. The night was inky black, as if the sky had decided to turn a blind eye to what was about to happen. Eli's house on the hill stood like a ship in a storm, a shelter but not a fortress. Inside, it smelled of gunpowder, dust, and fear that hid somewhere under the boards, between sighs and quick glances. Eli sat by the window, holding the Winchester in his lap. His face was calm, but his fingers twitched. He'd seen nights like this before, but now there was someone nearby he was responsible for. Tessa stood against the back wall, with a Colt in her hands. Its old holster dangled at her hip, a little big, as if it was someone else's part. The light from the oil lamp picked out the lines of her face, determination mixed with confusion. She tried to breathe evenly, as Eli had taught her, but inside, everything clenched. The crackling, the creaking of the floor, shadows.
They're here,
Eli said, barely audible. With the first footsteps on the porch, chaos began. One of the Navajo threw a flaming arrow into the roof. It sank into the shingles with a barely audible thunk, and the next moment, flames were shooting upward, licking the sky.
Windows!
Eli shouted.
Hold the right side!
Tessa nodded and got into position. Her first shot was too sharp, almost reflexive. The bullet went into the tree. But then she caught her breath. The second shot, chest. One of the attackers recoiled, collapsing to the ground. Eli moved with honed precision until one of the gunmen crept up from the side and fired through a gap in the wall. The bullet grazed his shoulder. The man groaned and staggered, but stayed on his feet. Tessa, hearing him, turned around. She fired again, this time at point-blank range. She saw the man's face before her finger pulled the trigger. He was very young, probably her age. His eyes widened with surprise, not fear, and it was over. He fell, and with him, a part of herself. Outside, one of the Navajos shouted something in their native tongue, and the rest of them began to retreat. The body at the door, the blood, the silence. Tessa stood in the doorway, still holding the Colt. Its muzzle trembled.
That was my cousin.
She whispered, staring into the void.
He knew me by name.
Eli, wounded, leaned against the wall, staring at her. Blood dripped from his fingers, but there was no suffering in his eyes, only respect.
You saved us,
He said.
and now you know the price.
The morning did not come. It seeped like ash through the boards, grey, lifeless, as if the sun itself had not dared to peer into the house where the carnage had recently boiled over. Tessa sat on the floor against the wall, her back against the cold wood. In her hands, a bloody knife and a rag. On her lap was Eli's body. He was alive, but there was a hoarse wind in his chest, and with each breath his face grew paler. Blood, a lot of it, too much for one man. He muttered something, and she leaned closer.
Don't let me just go like this.
He breathed out, looking through her as if he saw someone else. She didn't answer, just clamped down on the wound, pressed down like her mother had once taught her, in that distant, different house where the walls were made of twigs instead of bullets. Beneath her hand, warmth, a pulse, still alive. Nearby, on the floor, were shell casings. A charred arrow was still sticking out of the doorframe. Outside, it was empty. No bodies, no footprints. Only the wind raced the sand as if trying to erase the memory. Tessa stood up. Her hands were trembling. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. But there was something new in her eyes. Not just fear, not just guilt, responsibility. She grabbed the knife, boiled the water, and pulled out the bullet as best she could. His body twitched, but he didn't scream. Gritted his teeth, stayed with her. In that moment, not the old man and the girl, partners, bound by blood. When it was over, she sat next to him. The house was dead quiet. Only Eli's breathing, intermittent but stubborn. She could have left. No one would have judged. She could have disappeared forever. But she didn't. Tessa wiped her hands, adjusted the blanket on his chest, and said quietly, almost to herself,
Now you know who you saved.
The house on the hill looked very different. The cracks in the walls had been patched, the doors reinforced. The The dust and signs of battle had been erased, giving way to order and life. Outside the window, the desert still seemed vast, but now it had its own rhythm, the rhythm of those who remained. Eli sat by the fireplace, holding a cup of hot coffee. His shoulders were no longer so hunched and his eyes so clouded. The wound that had nearly cost him his life was slowly healing, but the scars remained more than just on his body. Tessa entered the room, quietly placing a ceramic bowl of herbal decoction on the table. She didn't look at Eli with gratitude or pity. There was something deeper in her eyes, a silent bond forged through fire and blood.
I'm not your guest,
She said, sitting down beside him.
and you're not my savior.
He smiled, faintly.
We're just the two of us left behind after the storm.
There was more understanding in that silence than 1,000 words. They had learned to live together, not expecting too much, but not abandoning each other. The desert outside was the same, but inside the house, inside them, a new fire began to burn. One that would not burn, but preserve. This is the end of this story. It started with loneliness and fear, and ended with two people who didn't look alike finding the strength to stay close. It is a story about choices, pain, and how sometimes the strangest of strangers become closer than family. It is a story that even in a world full of cruelty, you can find something worth protecting. If you enjoyed the story, please support it. Like, subscribe, and share in the comments. What moment touched you the most? What stories would you like to see next? Your feedback is the fuel for future stories. Thank you for being with us. And remember, even after the darkest night, there is always a dawn.